Welcome back to the FanSpeak Network. I'm your host, Megan Shoup. You can follow me on Twitter at Megs08DFS. And this is our final sibling showdown of the season, talking showdown of course, the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm joined by, of course, my sibling, my brother, Steve. You can follow him at SteveOSpeak. Steve, are you excited for the Super Bowl? I'm so sad that the season's over. I'm having problems coping. But are you excited for this Super Bowl, and are you excited to talk showdown?
Yeah, this season did fly by for sure. It is a little bittersweet, but
yeah,
I think the Super Bowl is going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of offense potential. So it should be a fun Super Bowl. And, then we'll just start diving into best ball and stuff for next year.
That's right. That's how I cope. Best ball tournament. Underdog releases a tournament, I think, Super Bowl weekend. Let's go. But we're talking showdown today. We were talking DraftKings showdown, and we were going to break down kind of captains, value plays, flex plays, contrarian strategies. But before we get into that, please be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. We really appreciate that as we grow the channel. Also, be sure to check out fanspeak.com. We've got football content all season long, and I'm sure we'll be doing a couple Super Bowl articles this week too. But now let's first, before we really go into the captains and such, I know how I'm kind of predicting and going to be betting this game. How are you projecting this game is going to go?
So what's the latest spread?
Latest spread is, I believe, 1.5. Let me bring it up though really quick. But yeah, as I'm bringing it up, what is what do you see? How do you see this game going? Who do you think's winning? What do you think the score will be?
Yeah, so I get why Philly is favored, especially with how banged up Kansas City is, particularly throughout their wide receiver group. But it's tough to argue against Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. They've been there multiple times, won. Just one of the best run organizations, and while Philly's looking great, they're much younger, much different, and you just wonder. You hear that sometimes, like the first time a team makes it to the Super Bowl, as they're constructed, it can be tough for them to totally pull it off. That being said, Philly's been great all year. We'll get into, some of their road maybe being a little easier than the Chiefs.
Just a little, yeah.
But no, it's a good offense. And when they're clicking, they're tough to stop. And even though the rest of that game, from the offensive side for the 49ers was terrible, end of the day, they did put up points against one of the best defenses of the 49ers. So, obviously extenuating circumstances there, but I don't want to take too much away from Philly and what this offense has accomplished. But I do like Kansas City, especially from a money line perspective.
Money line is plus 105. The spread's plus 1.5 for the Chiefs. Philly's favored by 1.5. Total set at 50.5.
So anytime you get a team like the Chiefs, one of the best quarterbacks. Mahomes has already gained his name in the all-time quarterback conversation.
Yep.
And Andy Reid has just been one of the best coaches in the NFL in the last 30 years. So, again, in the all-time conversation, anytime you're getting a point and a half in this case, that's tough to pass up because we've seen a lot of close Super Bowls where that point and a half could be the difference. So, but yeah, no,
so if you were betting it today, would you bet the Kansas City Chiefs money line?
I would bet the Chiefs. I'd probably just stick with a money line, just take them outright instead of worrying too much about that point and a half. But
yeah, absolutely.
And as for the over, 50, I think I'd take the over. I know Eagles defense has been pretty good throughout the year, but this is an offense like they've not seen this year, pretty much. So even with some of the injury concerns that Kansas City has. So I definitely take the over. And as we know, Philly can definitely score in bunches as well. So
I think it's going to be right around there.
I just kind of see an over, just too many ways to get over 50, both
That's
these
true. I
teams have
mean,
been so efficient with the touchdowns throughout the year.
right.
You know, it's tough to see a situation where one of these teams really slows the game down. They both, even though the Eagles do love to run the ball, it's not about slowing the game down. They run to advance the ball and
Right.
get big chunk plays with all their
Right.
backs and Hurts. So
Right. Yeah, I get what you're saying on the over. It just seems like all year, obviously, it has been a lower scoring season. Scoring has just been down. So I guess let me put it this way. I could see it being right around there. I wouldn't be surprised if it went under slightly because that's what we've seen. So every game we think is going to shoot out doesn't feel like it. Not many do, at least. And so, yeah, but I mean, I certainly see a case for the over. For me, go ahead, and then I had
another. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, we just have two teams here. Whoever you think is going to win, anytime they're winning, they're putting up 25, 30, 35 points.
Yeah,
that it's not going to take much for the other team to get to that over.
Right. Especially if it is competitive. Yeah.
Like I know Kansas City's coming off this game against the Bengals that was 23-20. And so, obviously would have hit the under, but just, you just look up and down their game log. This is a team that their defense has some talent for sure. I mean, we can talk about guys like Chris Jones, Frank Clark, all that, they got some guys, but I mean, they gave up 20 points, pretty much anytime they played a pretty good team. And it's obviously the Eagles. And then from the Eagles side, they blew out a lot of teams, including the playoffs, but we know what happened with the 49ers offense and the Giants, just probably shouldn't have been there. But when they played some of their better offenses that they faced, like the Cowboys, they gave up points like a few other teams. I mean, they definitely didn't. Like the Lions week 1, they gave up 35 points.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, and I'll bring that up with the different, quarterbacks that they have faced. And in 1 second, I'm bringing that up right now. But, to your point, I'm kind of in agreement with you. I think all week we're going to hear about, from both sides, whether you're on the Chiefs side, you're going to say the Eagles haven't played anybody all season, and they haven't, but to their credit, they beat who was in front of them. And, the NFL, honestly, there's only like 6 or 7 good teams to play. So, they haven't played anybody. And you look at the quarterbacks, they haven't played really anybody there either. To the other side, if you're an Eagles bettor, you're going to say, this is a, top offensive line unit, top defensive line unit, pressure rate. They have the one that's the highest pressure rates. When they create pressure, they get home at the highest rate, all those things. And that all makes a ton of sense. But again, I kind of lean more into, and it's not just because of all the Washington stuff I have behind me and it grosses me out that the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. I just lean to kind of more what you said initially. I'm going to lean more on Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Andy Reid on a bye, notoriously, is incredibly successful, over Jalen Hurts, who, listen, I am going to write some articles about what I was right and wrong on, and I will take the L on Hurts. I was wrong going into the season on my stance on him. I didn't think A.J. Brown would make him who he did become. But, I'm just trusting Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid over Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. And I do think Kansas City's been battle tested and the Eagles have not. And I just think that's going to be an interesting dynamic to play out. But it's interesting, depending on which side you're betting, you can easily lead into either of those narratives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the toughest thing for the Eagles is going to be if Kansas City can get up early, because since they have not had a tough schedule, they were front runners in pretty much every game throughout the year. And even in a couple games they lost, like their game, Hurts didn't play in it, their second game against the Cowboys, they were up big early in the first half, and the Cowboys battled back, took the lead, and then took a pretty solid lead. And then, of course, they didn't have Hurts. The Gardner Minshew had a pretty solid game. They weren't able to retake the lead. And, and I think we saw kind of the game that actually Hurts got injured in against the Bears. Hurts and the Eagles offense came out flat. Bears got a lead on them, and it wasn't until the very end, the last essentially couple drives, where the Eagles just really pulled away and their offense really started to click. And that was against one of the worst defenses in the league. So, that was one of the few instances where they did kind of have a comeback. And, there were a few others, like, the Colts game and Arizona to an extent. But those weren't against really good teams. Those weren't against really top offenses, like high functioning offenses. So, that's going to be the difference here. And of course, in this much more high pressure environment of the Super Bowl, that's a whole different ballgame. And look, we did see that from Kansas City when they beat the 49ers. 49ers were up. Kansas City had a tremendous fourth quarter, got a couple touchdowns, got the win there. So, so Kansas City goes down early, I would feel a little better. And we saw that throughout the year, multiple games this year where they went down. The Raiders went up big with them that week, 4 or 5 game, whatever that was. They came back on the Chargers. I think it was the second Chargers game. Chargers were kind of up. Chiefs came back to win that. We've seen them kind of battle tested, and they've had a really tough schedule. Even some of their down teams, like say the Raiders, early on the Raiders were playing well. Chargers, both of those were tough games, even though the Chargers, kind of obviously floundered.
Even the Broncos played them tough, honestly.
Even the Broncos, that first matchup. So, and of course, teams like the Bills and Bengals and things of that nature. And then the 49ers, they blew out the 49ers. So.
Well, let me read the Eagles schedule of quarterbacks, and I'll quickly read the quarterbacks, and afterwards you tell me how many sound like Mahomes, and I'll read them very quickly. Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins at nighttime, so that's a thing. Carson Wentz, let's see, Trevor Lawrence early in the season though, Kyler Murray before he had Hopkins back, Cooper Rush, Pickett in one of his first starts, Davis Mills, Taylor Heineke, who actually beat them, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, who played a half game, Ryan Tannehill, Daniel Jones twice, obviously in a few weeks time period, Justin Fields, Dak Prescott, who beat him, Andy Dalton, who beat him, and then, of course, again, Daniel Jones. It's the backup quarterback for the Giants the last game, then Daniel Jones in the playoffs, and then of course, Brock Purdy for 5 snaps, Josh Johnson and Christian McCaffrey. Come on. Besides Aaron Rodgers, nobody's even in the stratosphere of Patrick Mahomes.
Dak is by far the best quarterback they faced. And they put up a ton of points on this defense. Now, granted, again, Hurts did not play in that game, but the defense was there.
The starting defense was playing. Yeah, exactly.
And so, I think now, do I think that's going to happen every time? No, that was in Dallas, obviously non-neutral site, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And like you said, they could only beat the teams that the NFL put in front of them. And as we knew all year, the NFC was nowhere near as strong this year. And it got progressively worse throughout the year as teams like who were playoff teams last year, teams like the Cardinals and Rams just totally imploded. The Packers were not themselves. Rodgers was banged up. Missing so many receivers. Bucks were not themselves. Of course, Dallas had the Dak injury and Schultz and a few other guys early on. So they were much better down the stretch. But really only the 49ers and Eagles and Cowboys and Vikings. Yes, but that Vikings defense was just terrible. So, those were the only truly good teams. And they beat a couple of them. They beat Dallas without Dak, almost beat them second time with Dak. So again, props to the Eagles there. They crushed the Vikings, and then they did put up points, like I said, against the 49ers defense, but that game just got so out of whack with
so
turnovers,
the
short fields, things of that nature. And then time possession, just, the Eagles did not move the ball well in the first half. It was the second half where they could move the ball better, but by that time the game was kind of out of reach.
Right.
So no,
well, now let's talk captains, and game script for this game. So we've talked about, again, the stances on both sides. What are your stances for who are you prioritizing for captains? If you think the Chiefs are going to win, and I think the Chiefs are going to win. How are you handling the captain position?
Yeah. So, to me, the captain is, I think it's very simple. Do I think you could maybe take a shot on a guy a little lower? Sure. But I think it's Mahomes and Kelsey from the Chiefs, and then Hurts, Brown, or Smith from the Eagles. I really think that's where you have to be in the captain spot. I think there's just so many potential points. Obviously, you need the right run out for that to occur.
Mm-hmm.
For them to hit these, you need them to hit their ceilings. But we've just
Right.
seen those are the five guys who have just this monster like 30 plus point ceiling, which then of course in the captain spot is 1.5 times, and
Right.
you're going to need that. So those are the five guys that I really think should be your captain. I mean, they just have the extreme potential to get those ceilings. And I do think people will prioritize Hurts over Mahomes, and so I
Mm-hmm.
do like the idea of doing more Mahomes or Kelsey in the captain and
Mm-hmm.
just in general, just because I think you have just as much upside. And sure, Eagles are a tough defense. People will point to that, but this is a Chiefs team who the 49ers, when they played the 49ers this year, Mahomes had 31 points against the 49ers, who, had just as good of a defense, if not better. So the Bills, who, he had 24 and a half points, again, really good defense. They started to have injuries down the stretch and, without Von Miller, but at that time they had most of their guys. So yeah, I mean, I think you have a guy like Mahomes who can put up big points as needed. And, I think this could be a bit of a shootout game. And I just think, as we saw last week, Kansas City, when the chips are on the line, look, they had no receivers last week, but they still weren't going to try and run the football. They weren't going to try and run to win the game. And I think it's going to be through Mahomes' arm that if they have any chance of winning. And Andy Reid is not going to just sit back and just wait for that to emerge. He's going to come out firing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, the whole Andy Reid on a bye, if they can come out fast and Eagles are playing from behind, I think that is a very just interesting, story. Because again, in Showdown, you're always telling a story when you're building your lineups in each and every lineup. I agree with you that those are the top five captains. They all have the true ceiling potential. The problem is you're going to have to make some choices on who you fade. If you do, you can't then get all of those players, you're really going to make some tough choices. So let me ask you this, and then I'll kind of weigh into on some contrarian captains, because I agree with you on the top captain options. Any contrarian captains that you could see, because it does happen sometimes where a cheaper guy like a Goddard or one of the running backs, or, maybe even down lower, hits. And because they hit high enough, it allows you to jam in the studs if it is a higher scoring game, which you believe it's going to be over. So can you make a case for like a Goddard, Pacheco, McKinnon, anybody like that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we saw McKinnon at the end of the year and in the playoffs last year have some big 20-plus point games. And if he comes out and has like a 24, 25-point game at his price, yeah, he could be an interesting captain. But he just hasn't had that usage. Pacheco's getting way more of the rushing usage, and even last game against the Bengals got passing usage. So and that's the thing with Pacheco, even though he is getting the rushing usage, probably has better touchdown equity than McKinnon just from a running standpoint. Though McKinnon gets plenty of work in and around the goal line, it's just tough you're going to need one of those guys to get like two touchdowns, catches, decent yardage, to get that 24 to 28 points and pay off at their price. Goddard, I think, is the one guy who I would consider at the lower end, just because, if Hurts is needing to throw the ball and the ball filters his way a little bit more, probably not going to get a 100-yard bonus. Doesn't have the elite upside of Kelsey, but he could get 2 touchdowns.
He could get 2 touchdowns. Yeah, absolutely.
If he's like 7 for 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, he's probably your captain.
Right. Well, I believe that Houston game he was, and that was a game that he went for 100 yards and a touchdown had 27 DraftKings points. So, that's an example where he could be. Yeah, it was only probably once or twice this season that he was, but I think it is someone down low, a little down lower. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Those would be the ones I'd consider. I mean, someone like a Sanders, to me, it's like you maybe play him in the captain and assume he does what he did last week, or I don't know. That I'd like, or just fade him. I'd either play him in the captain or fade him, because he either seems to just get like 70 yards or 2 touchdowns and you need him. I don't know. What's your take on Miles Sanders?
Yeah, the tough thing with Sanders is kind of like he's kind of a lot like Pacheco. Runs will probably get the most carries. That's not always the case. But again, he's not only sharing it with 2 other backs, but also Hurts, and the touchdown equity. And look, he had 13 touchdowns this year, which after having 0 touchdowns last year, pretty impressive.
Yeah,
but,
he had 3 ceiling games of over 30 points, and then in playoffs last week, 17.5.
And that's the thing. Like, those 30-point games are very much outliers, because it all went right. Not only did he get well over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he actually had some catches, where there's other games where he might get 1 target or no target.
I was going to say, lately it's been barely any targets at all.
And when you're talking DraftKings, like, even if 1 catch for 10 yards, 2 points from the receiving side, like, unless you are a Derrick Henry, it's tough to be a running back who doesn't get a lot of catching, work. You need to be well over 100 and 2 touchdowns to even consider being an optimal. And it's not like he's super priced down. It's if he was 5,000, or for the captain, like 6,500 or something like that, then yeah, maybe. But he just needs it all to break, and it just seems unlikely in this type of game.
All right. Well, now let's talk values, because we've talked about who we like up top, obviously. And again, I think you're going to be building different scripts, different types of game scripts, right? Obviously, even though we think the Chiefs are going to win, I'm sure we'll hedge and build some that are more Eagles heavy too. But whatever the case is, we name 5 or 6 guys at the top. We name a few in the middle from both sides. Where are you going to save? Who do you like down low? I mean, if we're assuming that, if we're assuming that Hardman looks like he's going to be out, and we're assuming that Juju Smith-Schuster and Tony are in, but we don't know, how limited or, if they're going to be a full go. If we're assuming all that, what would you do with value plays?
Yeah. And this is the tough thing, about jamming in
because let me interrupt real quick. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's priced all the way up to 6,200. That's a tough price to pay, because all season he was around 5,000 if you played Chief Showdowns, because he's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and he either does, has a big game like he did in the AFC Championship game, where he doesn't do a whole lot at all. Earlier in the season, he produced a little more, but he popped off a couple times, but boy, is it incredibly inconsistent and incredibly risky. So 6,200 is a risky price for me to want to pay very often. Let me ask you about him first, and then other value plays. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so assuming that we do get both Juju and Tony back, then I'm going to have a lot less interest in MVS.
Right.
I think obviously all those receiver injuries against the Bengals help make MVS the guy. So,
and I'm the same. So,
and again, like you said, at that price point, because he's just behind Goddard, McKinnon, Pacheco, and then of course you could go down and get guys like Juju, Gainwell, Tony.
Okay. So let's look at that. Let's look at the underneath the backup quarterback, starting with Juju down, just down to the value range. Who are you considering?
Yeah. So, I know it's been bad for about about calendar wise 2 months, but since week 16, but I do like Juju. I mean, he was the top receiver, not named Kelsey, on this team throughout the year. Not a ton of touchdown equity, but again, we're talking PPR. If he goes out there and just gets peppered with underneath targets just to be a chain mover, he could have 8 for 80. That's 16 points at 5,600. That is something that, as you can see, throughout his game log, that's a type of range that he was in multiple times this year. And of course, if he somehow gets a touchdown or somehow gets a little bit more and gets over the bonus, then you're gravy.
Oh yeah.
And most of the year he was priced in the 7,000-8,000s for showdown type plays.
Right.
So
now
I
he's
think you're getting
5.6.
some potential value. I mean, again, we need to see all the injury reports. Like, are they saying he's just going to be out there, but less than 100%? There's some inherent risk here.
Oh yeah.
No doubt about it. But I do like him just because he's also more experienced, more playoff experience. His time with the Steelers, probably has one of the best connections with Mahomes from this group. So, and also, hopefully he's going to run more out of the slot. That's where the Eagles are the weakest, in the middle of the field. Their outside corners are another reason why I'm just not interested in MVS is their outside corners are some of the best in the league. So, yeah, I don't like MVS for Darius Slay. And sure, exactly. Eagles might try to adjust, but Kelsey has to be their top priority if they're trying to take anyone out. So a guy like Juju could be the biggest beneficiary in plays where Kelsey's just being double teamed and MVS is locked up on Darius Slay.
Right.
But that's a big
if. So who else?
Tony, kind of the same ballpark. Just, we saw before he got injured, he had a big play, almost had a touchdown. But it's just tough because he's just been very limited just throughout his career due to injuries. He's a playmaker for sure. He's got the ability to break big plays,
right?
And that's what they want from him. But they've really had to manufacture the ball to him, and
sure.
It's just tough. You wish he was healthier because it's like not only are you worried about the injury side, but this is a guy who's needed the full 2 weeks of practice.
Where would he line up? Would he line up in the slot, or is it just all kind of like you said, manufactured?
He'll be in the slot. He'll be outside, but a lot of it's just going to be manufactured.
Right. Because that was the thing going into the last game is he wasn't running many routes, but when he was out there, he was getting, the game before he got 6 targets on like 12 routes. So, that's what's tough is if he's a full go, if he's getting that kind of usage when he's out there at 4.4K, that's a little enticing. That's a hell of a savings. So what about Gainwell, the kickers, the defenses, Scott? And then we can get into just kind of quickly.
I like Gainwell probably the most. I know Boston Scott has run better with touchdowns of late, but Gainwell's just out there more.
Yeah.
He's out there for more passing downs. Well, he doesn't get a ton of targets. Especially if you think that this is going to be a more high scoring game, that's either, and even if you think the Eagles are going to win, but if you think it's going to be more high scoring and back and forth, that probably leads more to Gainwell having more passing opportunities. So, but he's also, in the playoffs, they gave him 14 and 12 carries. That is a pretty good sign. And sure, those are blowout games and that's part of it. But, I think they like Gainwell. But it is tough just because there are so many running backs. You probably will need him to get a touchdown some which way, and that can be tough to predict. Same with Boston Scott. It's just a lesser version of that. Like he's not going to get as many, if any, targets. He really
hasn't had any
6 all year.
But
they do like using him in the red zone for whatever reason. He's got touchdowns in both playoff games, got one in the final game of the year, though they're resting some guys. So yeah, that's from a cheap standpoint, 3,000, it's nice. The kickers, Jake
Elliott has not had. He just doesn't put up much numbers outside of a couple.
They're so efficient in getting touchdowns. They also go for it on fourth down.
Right.
If it's fourth and short, they're just going to go for it. So they're not going to. They're going to pass up. Even though he has the leg for a 50-yard field goal, if it's 4th and 1, 4th and 2, 9 times out of 10, they're just going to go for it.
Sure.
So it's just
that's why I like Bucker more between the two for sure.
And so you're going to need like a 4th, and even if it's like 4th and 4, they could go for it in the right situations.
Right.
Bucker, some of the same issues, but I think they'd be more apt to kick some of those field goals. But neither one is great. And also, if this does get to be kind of a shootout, the coaching staff might have no choice but to go for it in these types of situations. So
anybody of the, hold your nose and, again, if the Kansas City receivers are a go, Are you touching a Justin Watkins or Noah Gray? Are you messing around with like a Quez Watkins or Justin Watson, Noah Gray, Quez Watkins, Zach Pascal? I mean, these seem, it gets really thin down there. I don't have a ton of interest. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, Sky Moore is the one guy that people will point to. He got 7 targets when everyone went down, but he only got 3 catches for 13 yards. Look, he was a second-round talent. There is some natural talent there, some ability for him to be a playmaker. They just have not been able to incorporate them in the offense. That being said, with all these guys banged up, he's probably getting a lot of practice time with Mahomes these 2 weeks. So
that's a good point. And he's someone that, I think I'd take a shot on him probably over Watson if one of them, Tony or Juju, was limited, or out.
Yeah, and the issue with Justin Watson is he's really just been a deep threat guy for them.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they're
you're banking on 1 or 2 targets.
They're going to take a couple of deep shots, but it's also, again, that's likely going to be against the Eagles' best corners. So I would rather go with the Sky Moore, who could maybe break something, get used in and around the goal line. Right. I don't think you'll see Justin Watson in a lot of goal line type plays.
Right. Agreed. No, I think all that makes a ton of sense. And I don't have a ton of interest in the Eagles' cheapy receivers. Definitely not. I mean, I don't believe either of them. Yeah, Pascal hasn't really been getting any targets. I don't know how much run he's getting. Watkins has been a little more fluky. Some games he's gotten 4 or 5, but in the playoffs he didn't at all. So any interest there?
No, I mean that team, for as good as that offense is, 1, they get so many of their touchdowns on the ground, and 2, they've just said, we're just throwing to their top 2 receivers and Goddard pretty much. So, Watkins, even though he'll be out there, an okay clip, it's a lot of it is just window dressing. It's only if everyone else is covered that he's going to get a shot.
Sure. I totally agree with that. Okay, let's talk before we build a lineup together. Let's talk a couple contrarian builds. We talked about, of course, the captains we like, some values we're willing to take shots on, some mid-tier guys. We talked about how we see this game playing out, but now you have to put it all together. And again, you're going to, I know I'll be doing different builds. While I think the Chiefs are going to win, yes, I will do some builds where I am telling the story that the Eagles are going to win, or I'm more Eagles heavy. But let's talk. I think a lot of people are going to be more 4-2 Eagles, definitely 3-3, lean more, like you said, Hurts over Mahomes, those kind of things. I think I could even see the Eagles receivers getting prioritized over Kelsey. I think some people will tell the story, oh, the Eagles are really good against tight ends. Well, guess what? There's only 5 or 6 good tight ends in the league. So who are they good against? Logan Thomas and Tanner Hudson. I mean, who are they good against? I mean, I don't know what TJ Hawkinson did that first week when he was with the Lions, but they really didn't face good tight ends. And then last week against 49ers, Kittle was kind of neutered because he didn't have a quarterback. So, that's all I'm saying is all those type of things where, statistically, yes, you need to look at how they are against certain positions. I'm definitely scared of the Eagles cornerbacks against an outside perimeter receiver. Tight ends, that kind of matchup, you had to put context to it. And I don't know that they've faced a ton that, really would put fear in your eyes outside of Kittle, who again didn't have his quarterback. So that's my way of saying I'm prioritizing Kelsey. I'm prioritizing Mahomes. Those are ways that I'm going to get contrarian. Does that mean I'm going to fade Hurts, or fade Hurts a ton? No, of course not. I'm not, but I am the ways. Let me run by a couple of my contrarian. We'll do it this way. I'll run by a couple of my contrarian builds and you tell me quickly if you like it, yay or nay kind of deal. One contrarian build is to, let's just say 4-2 Chiefs. Now that could be with or without Hurts. But what do you think of that? I think that will be more contrarian just in itself with a 4-2 Chiefs, especially if you have a player in the captain.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be more contrarian for sure. And I do think it's possible. I mean, you're going to have to pick one of those, cheap Chiefs, whether it's Sky Moore or Noah Gray or somebody like that to round up your lineup, of course, but because I do think in that sense, since kickers are, like, unfortunately, to me, it's tough to play a kicker. I think Bucker's okay, but it's like if you're going 4-2 in a lot of showdown builds, if you're going 4-2 one way, you're probably maybe bringing back, you'd maybe consider a kicker like a lower scoring game. It's going to be like 24-20, and that other kicker's getting a couple early field goals. I just think that's a tough call from an Elliott perspective. So, but I think there are ways to do that for sure.
Okay. Another contrarian build idea I have is maybe you don't mess around with many of the Chiefs receivers since they are coming off injury, or, those very tertiary receivers like a Justin Watson or Sky Moore, and you play Mahomes with Kelsey and one of or both of the Chiefs running backs. I think Andy Reid, McKinnon was used as a weapon at the end of the season. Then the last 2 weeks in the playoffs, it's been more Pacheco. What if this time it's both? And I don't think that means you have to fade Mahomes if you're playing both Chiefs running backs. I think that could be actually very contrarian. Thoughts on that really quick?
Yeah, I mean, obviously McKinnon, if he's getting there, it's going to be mainly through his receiving anyway. So he definitely correlates well with Mahomes.
Yeah.
Pacheco's a little different in that regard. Outside of last week, they've had very little correlation. But what I will say, the only tough thing with that is I think it would be tough to have Kelsey as well. I think it's tough to see Kelsey getting there and those two backs, because likely they're getting there because of short red zone touchdowns. And that means Kelsey's not getting those red zone touchdowns because, as great as Kelsey is a tight end, and we can talk about him a little bit more, but there's a lot of ways where Kelsey can get there without getting the bonus. Something that can't necessarily be said for like AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. Right. So he needs those touchdowns. He's going to need like 2 touchdowns pretty much.
I was going to say that might work if it was more like a volume thing for Kelsey and a touchdown thing for Pacheco and McKinnon, where then Kelsey did get, 9-10 catches for 120 some yards or something like that, fell into the flex. You were able to get one of the, the one of the running backs to save money in the captain. Again, these are just very contrarian. All these ideas, by the way, for the Millie Maker, for the large field, where you're like playing with a lot of people, trying to chop with as little less people as possible. Last contrarian idea. Again, let me make this clear. I'm going to have plenty of lineups with Jalen Hurts. I will obviously play some Jalen Hurts in the captain, but I think if you fade Hurts, you are I'm taking a wild guess. We do not know ownership yet, but I'm taking a guess. Again, I think people are going to prioritize Hurts over Mahomes. I think Hurts is going to come in probably 70% owned, if not higher. What do you think do you think that projection's around in the ballpark?
I think he'll crack 80%.
Okay. Yeah, that's my point. So if he fails for his price, he doesn't have to fail, but the Eagles could even win. But if he only gets 20 DraftKings points, 18 DraftKings points, something along those lines. Last week, he only got 14 DraftKings points. He was still in the optimal as a flex because nobody on the 49ers besides Christian McCaffrey did anything, and his receivers didn't do anything. So I think it was Christian McCaffrey, 2 of his running backs, Hurts, Philly defense, something else. So, it all depends on what all the other players are doing. So if it's a higher scoring game and the higher priced Kansas City players are getting there, namely Kelsey and Mahomes, and, let's say some of Hurts's volume guys get there, 1 or 2 of his receivers or 1 of his running backs, something along those lines, especially if his running backs keep him out of the end zone. I know we talked about this pre-show. So I think a very contrarian way is a total fade of Hurts, still playing Eagles. It can be even 3 Eagles, but you're just telling the story that the Eagles, whether win or lose, they're getting there with the volume of X, Y, or Z player. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I actually think, I think the interesting thing with Hurts, even though he has this great ceiling and 30 plus points, and just a tremendous floor, but when we're talking about a showdown and price being considered, it's really going to come down to you can basically Hurts or Mahomes. Like if you're, and I mean, Kelsey and Brown are right there. Smith gives a little bit more savings, of course, but AJ Brown's 2,000 less than Jalen Hurts. So and I'll even go further. if Jalen Hurts has 25 DK points, but it's also how it's done. If he throws, say, 250 plus, 3 touchdowns throwing, and 20, 30 rushing yards, it'll be right around 25 DK points with no turnovers. But if AJ Brown, again, 2,000 less, obviously Devonta Smith, who's even a little lower than that, has 8 for over 100 and 1 or 2 touchdowns. That's putting him right at 25. That's the same thing. And let's say Goddard has a big game, and then Miles Sanders has a rushing touchdown, or Gainwell at a lower point gets a couple catches, a touchdown or two, and yeah, Hurts might outscore Gainwell. Hurts is 25, Gainwell is 18, but Gainwell is $5,000.
Right.
So what it boils down to is then on the other side, are Mahomes and Kelsey outscoring Hurts? And if
Right.
the answer is to yes there, and you can do something and get, in this kind of scenario, Brown or Smith, Goddard and Gainwell from that side, and Mahomes and Kelsey, then you don't need Hurts. Hurts would not be in the optimal and that type of thing. And that's him having a good game. That could be him with the Eagles winning.
Yeah.
But if like I said earlier, the Chiefs are going to throw to win this game. Like that's the only way they're going to win. They're not going to run it. Maybe just situationally they get down near the goal line a couple times and they run it. But more likely than not, if they're in this game, behind in this game, or winning this game, they're throwing the ball. So that's why it's much easier to like Mahomes and Kelsey and just see the ability for them to get ceilings, either piling up catches and maybe the bonus for Kelsey and 1 or 2 touchdowns, or Mahomes, Mahomes needs to be well over 300 yards. He needs to have 3, 4, maybe 5 touchdowns.
Right.
But no, it's definitely possible. And I think that's a way, just because Hurts is going to see such an ownership jump, both captain wise and overall, versus those two.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what it boils down to.
And so it's like you said it perfectly. If Mahomes and Kelsey beat his just raw score, then that's where it makes sense to prioritize them and fade Hurts. I know I sound like a Hurts hater because again, I'm taking the L from the whole season, but like he has had some just mediocre games. As a passer, it was a very mediocre game last week.
Well, it's just a matter, again, like even him having a very good game, if he's not getting it on the ground, that means then other Eagles players are. So, if, like I said, if he throws for 250, 275, and even throwing for 3 touchdowns, normally you're thinking that's great. Like I need this guy, but if he's not getting it on the ground, that means other Eagles are getting those key touchdowns. And, and because they're so concentrated in terms of receiving with Brown, Goddard, Devonta Smith, if it's 275 and 3 touchdowns, probably 2 of those guys are going to be in that, high teens, low to mid 20s range. And if Hurts is not extending much above that, those guys are so lower priced that you'd want those guys. Now, if it's like you said last week and the Chiefs are just terrible and Mahomes and Kelsey and all those guys are terrible, then you'd still want Hurts because he's outscoring Mahomes.
Because his floor, Kelsey. I mean, if you look at, if you could see the box score, his floor is always, very safe in the teens, 20s, you said, most games are in the mid 20s, and that kind of stuff. I mean, but the guy has a insane amount of rushing touchdowns. So the key to the Hurts fade is number 1, Mahomes and Kelsey outscoring him. Number 2, keep his ass out of the end zone, which usually his players are just pushing his ass into the end zone. And so if he stays out of the end zone as a runner, then that's a way a Hurts fade could potentially work, because that's what would keep him from these big 30, 35, 39, 36. If he has that, he's your captain. He has to be in your lineup, probably your captain. But, again, it all is kind of depending on what other people do too.
It's just at that price, assuming this is a decently back and forth game and a high scoring game, 24, 25 points. And same is true for Mahomes. If Mahomes is only getting 24 points and it's Pacheco's getting a rushing touchdown, McKinnon gets a rushing touchdown.
Right. We're saying the same for him. Yeah.
They have a defensive touchdown, whatever the case may be, or just a ton of field goals, then like Mahomes is not going to be there. Kelsey obviously starts to get a little, cheaper than say Hurts, but still you're going to need him high 20s, low 30s. It's just, it boils down simply to, I think if Hurts gets a rushing touchdown, you probably need him.
Yeah, because look at the box scores up, last 2 playoff games, rushing touchdown, 35 around 35 rushing yards. Passing yards are not impressive, and I don't know. We don't know what the shoulder
those
injury.
Are 2 blowouts. So
exactly. Yeah. But I'm just saying, I also wonder about the shoulder. I do. You do have to wonder on that grossly over and thrown ball to AJ Brown. He didn't, I don't know, as a passer, he didn't look incredibly sharp to me. So, I don't know. Well, I'm just saying that, if Mahomes is putting up numbers, he's probably going to have to put up numbers passing, but the, last 2 games, he's only put up 121, 154. He did have 2 passing touchdowns in the Giants game. So, I think we've covered that well. Why don't you say we build a lineup? Do you want to try to build a lineup trying to show this, basically? Because again, we'd have to make choices. We can't play all 3 of, okay, if you do play all 3 of Hurts, Mahomes, and Kelsey, you are definitely going to have to. And if you play one of them in the captain, I'll say this: if you play all 3 of those guys, you have to either have a cheap captain, or if one of those guys or a expensive captain is your captain, then you're going to have to really find some massive punts. And we kind of already touched on that very well, that there's not a lot to like down there, right? Did I summarize that pretty much? So do you want to work with this very contrarian concept of fading Hurts, prioritizing Kelsey and Mahomes, still getting Eagles pieces, and building it like that?
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Okay, so let's build a lineup together. With that, we're not going to fill out the entire lineup. We'll fill out most of it. We'll take turns. But I do think this should be a Kelsey captain. So to tell this story, can I go first and put Kelsey in the captain? Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then I'll let you go next. Oops, I didn't put him in the captain.
I think it's very similar between the 2. But I'm gonna go Devonta Smith in this.
Okay, I like that. Well, just because we talked about we're prioritizing Kelsey and Mahomes and we're fading Hurts, we're going to go ahead and do that. So that really paints our picture here. We've got 4,800 left with Kelsey, Mahomes, Devonta Smith. Now you have 3 spots to fill. I love that start. Where do you go from there so that it's not totally uncomfortable for the rest of your lineup?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Goddard.
Oh, okay. You're making it tough on me here.
Well, I think that's the way that Hurts doesn't. Like I said, it's going to be Hurts throwing the ball. Like if Hurts can't throw the ball, like you were alluding to, then he's either the Eagles are getting blown out and he's not in there, or he's doing it on the ground and he is in there.
Right. No, that's a great point. And you know what I like about this, and it was the reverse side of this, is 2 years ago, I tied for first. I chopped with a lot of people, but I tied for first in the Super Bowl with the Chiefs and Bucks. And what it was a 4-2 Bucks lineup. And it was fading Mahomes. So it was the other way around, basically. It was fading the favorite quarterback, because at that time the Bucks were the underdog, right? I believe. Yes. And I was fading the favorite quarterback, and I captained the Bucks, 4-2 Bucks, and faded Mahomes, but I played both Tyreek Hill and Kelsey, telling the story that, in a negative game script, they're going to have to get there just in pure volume. And whether they get in, they didn't score, but they both got there in pure volume and were in the optimal. So I love this start. I think there's a lot of ways you could go here. And it doesn't have to be a 4-2, at all in this area. I think you could either, you're in that kicker range, you're in that Sky Moore range. You could do like a Gainwell, but then I think you'd have to geez, that you'd be looking at like Gainwell, Boston Scott. So it'd be like a 2-4. What are your, I know we're kind of trying to take turns, go back and forth here, but do you like more of like grabbing like another pass catcher for the Chiefs, or what are your thoughts on here? Because
Yeah.
again, that price point doesn't leave you too uncomfortable. However, unless you were like throwing in like a Boston Scott, that doesn't, you don't have a lot of room unless you're double
No.
kickering, or not even that you can't do.
No.
So
No, and I think that's the tough thing with this slate, like we said. But the idea of this build is, and I just want to touch on this real quick, is by you're essentially replacing Hurts with Smith and Goddard, and instead of having three kind of punt type plays, you're only having two in Moore and Bucker. So that's what it boils down to. Because you could run Kelsey captain, Hurts, Mahomes, and then but you're not getting Smith, you're not getting AJ Brown, you're not getting Goddard, you're not getting any of the Kansas City running backs or Sanders or even Gainwell. Then you're talking truly like three guys. I mean, maybe you could do Gainwell, but you're really in a bad spot. So that's essentially what we're doing here.
Yeah,
and this could,
I like it.
This could absolutely be still Eagles winning this game. It's just their touchdowns are spread out between all their different running backs. And Hurts, like I said, throwing for like 3 touchdowns, and they're in this case, we're saying it's going to be Smith and Goddard, the beneficiary of those, and Mahomes and Kelsey in a negative game script. So I think you could approach it a couple different ways. I do like, I think Tony and Sky Moore are viable. I don't love Jake Elliott, but I think in this kind of build, he's playable. I think you could even make the case for a defense. Maybe both can get after the quarterback. Eagles get a lot of the hype, but the Chiefs have a ton of sacks. We saw what they were doing against Burrow early in the game. Last week. And maybe there's a defensive touchdown there. Maybe that's why Hurts isn't getting in the lineup, because Mahomes threw a pick 6 or had a strip sack fumble for a touchdown, something along those lines. We see that all the time. So just want to point that out there. But,
that's a good point.
Essentially, my point is, I kind of like the idea of only having to get 2 cheap guys, and one might have to be a Boston Scott or a Watson or a Noah Gray. But I kind of like having at least one of Sky Moore or Tony just for another pass catcher. Tony is a little better assuming he's healthy, but that's about it.
Yeah, I kind of liked. I threw in some, just kind of putting one more in and leaving it, but I kind of threw in Sky Moore because we talked about him earlier. Like, he could be getting a lot of work with Mahomes right now, or he is getting a lot of work with Mahomes right now. So, and again, nobody's better than drawing stuff up and creating things in 2 weeks than Andy Reid. So I kind of like that as a guy that, it's risky, but like, again, if either of those Juju Smith-Schuster and or Tony are limited, then, I think, like you said, he's kind of in there more in the red zone area. I don't mind that at all. I do like having one of the Chiefs running backs, but I think you would have to, go down from like
I'm
Goddard
not really
to
prioritizing the Chiefs backs.
Okay.
I think it's tough for them to find the ceiling. I mean, McKinnon, obviously we've seen it in the past, but it's tough to have a ceiling at that price. To me, Miles Sanders is just as good as them, and I don't really love Miles Sanders. So
I'm still deciding on that. Just like, I find obviously Mahomes to be one of the best, obviously, and Andy Reid to be just one of the most brilliant coaches, and I'm just so interested to see his game plan. Honestly, that's one of the things I'm most excited about for the Super Bowl is Andy Reid's game plan against this very good Philly defense. So I'm interested to see that. And it's like, that's as a showdown player, what weapon is he going to use? We know he's going to find a way to get Travis Kelce involved, targets, right? And that's why we like Kelce and the captain, but who else, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, no,
Any final thoughts before we get? I mean, I think it was
the one
good that we
thing,
talked it through and showed like that kind of lineup. But
the one thing I will say, and this is why I do think Kelsey is a bit of a priority over Brown and Devonta Smith, is one, you're not guessing. I mean, we know where those targets are going to go. We know, you just look at Kelsey's postseason track record. I mean,
it's
we're
ridiculous.
we're talking 10 plus targets pretty much every time, at least 8 catches, multiple 100-yard games, multiple touchdown games. So yeah, I mean, the floor is going to be great. The ceiling is incredible. And yes, we're always trying to shoot for the top, but if Kelsey doesn't have the best run out and only gets 18, 20 points, like he just has such a high floor. Obviously I'm not saying for the captain, but if you say played Hurts or Mahomes and the captain or a receiver, something else, he just gives you that floor where like an AJ Brown, as we saw, if the Eagles are just running the ball, Brown and Devonta Smith can get game scripted out, I think, a little bit more easily. So,
absolutely.
Or it just could be one of them and the other one is just not doing it. Like I said, especially in the Hurts, like where Hurts is not, unless he's throwing for like 350, which he just really didn't have to do a lot this year. So most games this year, it'd be one or the other who just kind of dominated. And, like where Kelsey, we know it's Kelsey. Kelsey's the number one.
And that's what I like about it too.
The one last thing is, again, Eagles didn't face a lot of tough tight ends, but again, their linebackers and their safeties, good. They're good players. I'm not taking anything away from them, but they are not their outside corners. And I just don't see them able to move their outside corners in to try and cover Kelsey. I think they're going to try and bracket him more and double team him more. But like you said, Andy Reid is the absolute best at finding ways to get Kelsey open, and Patrick Mahomes just has a sixth sense. I think he could be blindfolded with Kelsey and complete the ball to him quite a bit.
Yeah, even though, I mean, those videos of that Buffalo game last playoffs where it's just like they almost play backyard football with each other. It's just wild.
So much in sync and on the same page. And look, so are Hurts and AJ Brown and Hurts and Devonta Smith are looking like that as well. But with Kelsey, it's just his red zone usage is so incredible, and it's just that kind of ability to get that crazy ceiling is there.
I like what you said. It's playing less of the guessing game, especially in such a key position like the captain. Again, listen, we're going to be playing other captains. We're going to be doing other builds. We're going to be playing Jalen Hurts. We just wanted to show an example of how you can do a very contrarian build of fading Jalen Hurts in a game that can still be very back and forth, So, all right. Well, this was fun. I think, this is going to be a fun Super Bowl to watch. Hopefully we have a successful showdown. Hopefully you all have a successful showdown. Before you get out of here, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. Check out fanspeak.com for all football content, and, enjoy the Super Bowl. One more game, and then come back and check out best ball content here all off season. But enjoy the Super Bowl. Good luck. And we hope you do well in your showdown contests. We'll see you next time.